Great, thank you. Shade Tree Commission is now started for May 12th. All members of the commission are here, so the established quorum. We need to approve the non-existent April 2022 minutes because nobody did them. So I will go back and review and make some minutes for those from the TV. Which brings us to, Ann, will you take minutes for tonight? Sure. Thank you. Okay. Title 33 tree permit, right-of-way issues and public land. We do have some right-of-way tree permit requests. David?
Title 79, 79 Central has some trees that are dead and dying in the public right-of-way. We have a request to review those, remove, and hopefully replace them. For 49 Morris, this gentleman has asked us to trim some right-of-way trees. The limbs, however, are not in the right-of-way, and they're in the utility drop. And our recommendation and our policy has been not to mess with trees that are close to utilities. It's just a very dangerous situation for the city to be in. So my recommendation to you would be to consider having either the property owner contact the utility company or contact a person that's qualified to work around utility lines to trim those trees. So this one is not in the right-of-way, even though he did a right-of-way request.
It's not in the right-of-way.
It's not in the right-of-way, yeah. Okay. The tree's in the right-of-way, the limbs are not.
Oh. That's an interesting distinction.
That's an interesting distinction.
So if I could just go a little farther along that, the state of Ohio has, and maybe Ann could help me with this, but the state of Ohio has some laws and regulations in place that the tree that crosses a property line, the neighbor has the right to trim the limbs on that tree as long as it doesn't hurt or damage the tree. And the city has kind of followed that policy. So if we have a tree in the right-of-way and a branch is outside of the right-of-way and leaning on a house or something, then the property owner actually has the right to trim that limb back. Ideally, they'd want to come and trim it back at the trunk, and in that case, they would want to get a permit from the tree board. That's the best way to do it, but state law states that they can actually trim it at the property line.
Well, don't we have some sort of contract with Asplund? I mean, they were in my neighborhood for weeks.
So the utilities have a contract with Asplund to trim trees, and they've notified the city of some tree trimming, and I think staff has passed that along. That was last fall or winter. Where they were going to be doing trimming this year.
So my question is this a tree such that if they trim it at their property line, will it adversely affect the tree? Or is that something that we need to go out and assess?
I'd suggest that somebody take a look at it.
Okay.
And I don't know, Anna, were you out there? I think you might have looked at that.
Yeah. So I agree with you, David. Local political subdivisions have the obligation and the authority to maintain the public right-of-way, but it's a slippery slope. It sets a really expensive precedent to start pruning trees for private interests. So it makes perfect sense to allow property owners, with a permit to at least trim branches back that might be conflicting with their house or their wires. I think it's a good idea to still maybe provide some guidance, maybe an arborist list down the road. Maybe we even permit arborists, kind of like we permit plumbers and electricians. At one time in the city of Athens, that was done. Mm-hmm. So if a homeowner wanted to hire an arborist, the city would say, hey, well, here's the guys that are girls, people that are able to do work in the city. I will say this. AEP and their contractors, as far as I know, they do not prune secondary wires or laterals. So this is probably something that a homeowner is going to have to do on their own. I don't think it'll be a big deal. I didn't think it was a big deal when I saw the tree.
I would like to make a clarification, though, because when I heard you talk, David, and forgive me if I'm misinterpreting, you said that a property owner has the right to trim a limb if it is on their property. That I don't think is correct.
Yes, I'm sure it is, yeah.
Is it, or is it that if the tree is in the city right-of-way, we have the permission to give them the permission to cut a
So if
limb?
I could clarify just a little bit, the state
Yeah.
law says that if a tree limb is on your property, you have the right as a property owner to trim it. That's not the best way and wouldn't be my recommendation to do. So if you're 15 feet away from the tree trunk and you're trying to trim some limbs,
Yeah.
that is really not the greatest for the tree. You want to actually come back towards the tree trunk to do the trimming, and in that case, you'd be in the city's public right of way.
Yeah, no, I understand all that, but I thought that code says that if a tree, and it is defined by the trunk, not the limb, if the tree is in the city right-of-way, it is the city's tree. Now, the city can say, we will not prosecute somebody
Yeah.
if they cut a limb, if it's in their property, because we're following some other guidelines. But I think that the clarification that I would like to make, and might have to be made in code, is, yes, this is our tree, thank you, you've asked for a permit, here's the permit, we're not doing the trimming ourselves, according to our guidelines, you have permission to do X, whatever X is. If it's cut to your property line, or if we say it has to be cut as per these specifications.
I think that was pretty logical.
So if I
But that
could
was
just.
different than what was said originally.
Yeah, so if
I
I could.
just want to
if you-
find out where we
If you don't
are.
mind, if I could just, I'm
Yeah.
almost positive, I've seen this lots before, it's state law, it's state policy.
But it's not, but that's between two private property
Between two.
owners.
well,
Right.
So this
And
is
this is
public,
not.
yeah, it's, so the,
So my suggestion would be to check with the law director.
Yeah, let's
to
look at
clarify that.
code,
you
and I
guys
know
are
that
gonna
we're
learn about this
rewriting.
at Tree Commission Academy. Because the codes that drive a city tree care program are all about protecting and managing that right of way, okay? The code that you're referring to is between private property owners, and that's related to insurance and liability issues like between, neighbors. It's called neighbor law, and so totally different. But I think it'll be really clear once we go through Tree Commission Academy. It's the first thing that we discuss at Tree Commission Academy. I do think that your code is probably adequate. I think the permit system is where you want to go so that there's not, because I can think of those two sweet gums
Yeah.
that were off of East State Street.
Yes.
That
I agree with you, and I agree with you. I agree with both. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we know we're going to look at tree maintenance and tree code, this is one of those things that if we have to clarify, that we do in code, and if we have to clarify in guidelines, which is separate, we do that too. But for this specific situation, I really like what you said. Thank you for, submitting your tree permit. You did it exactly right. This is what we're going to allow you to do. But make it sound like you asked about a city tree, we are giving you permission, this is how we would like for you to do it.
And I think there's a complication if there's involving these wires. And if that person gets damaged in some way or hurt because he tries to trim the tree.
You can make that requirement of, the permit can determine who would be
It has to
doing the
be a
work.
certified.
A certified.
Yeah, and
arborist.
there are, within
Or-
the realm of being a certified arborist, there are specializations that allow arborists to work either between, within 2 or 10 feet of a wire. And that's kind of already spelled out in the industry.
Yeah. So I really like the fact that they did do the permit, and I really like the fact that this is going to be a really good example for us to begin to think through. Oh, this is how we're going to write this guideline. So
And I
everybody
do-
remember this example.
Right.
Yeah, Roxanne, and I think, just to kind of summarize what
Yeah.
you're saying, because we want those trees, the city is liable if the tree falls down and hurts somebody in the right of way. So there is a motivation that the city would have, even if there is a branch that's on private property, because we want those trees to be pruned properly.
That's correct.
And that'll actually help,
Yeah.
if they're pruned properly, they're gonna help with whatever issue that property owner is gonna have.
And just
too.
long-term health of the tree, I
Yeah.
think. So I always like to give positive feedback, If somebody did the right thing, you say, you did the right thing. but
You gotta
here's
cut it
the next step.
yourself.
Right. Well, and yes, so 79 Central seems a little more straightforward, so,
Dead and dying trees, has somebody looked at that? Or do we have to, or have you already made the assessment?
So my job is to tell you whether these subject trees are located in the right of way, and then it would be up to you as the board to decide what to do with them.
Okay. I have a suggestion. We can always do these at meetings, which is once a month. I sort of liked it in the past where you also just shot us an email that said, hey, this is something that needs to be done, get it done. And maybe it goes to Chris if Chris is willing to be the wrangler or somebody else. But I hate to think that, somebody puts in a permit tomorrow and you go, oh, well, we'll get back to you in 29 days. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel comfortable?
I would be okay with that. That's a great policy
Just,
procedure that we want to put in place.
doing any permit would need a majority quorum if we're voting, so.
So a decision has to be made at the meeting?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, can it be done by email?
I'm not sure about that one.
Okay, because
That would be a Lisa question. I agree with what you're saying. I think that having, unless it's a particularly complicated sort of permit, being able to make them process faster would be a lot.
Well, after we get through with all of this, we need to write it down.
Right.
So we
Yeah.
can follow this.
Well,
just-
and that's something we'll be talking about later from the discussion I sent around the other day about.
Well, it's
yeah.
also because of something that
Yeah,
all of us have been through.
right.
These procedures are not well known and nobody knows
Right.
who's doing what.
Just to give you guys some ideas of what other cities, they typically do try to respond as they come in.
Yeah.
Chillicothe, for example, will kind of appoint every tree commissioner. They do it in groups of 2. They have a week of the month that it's their job to review tree permits. And so they don't even discuss those at their tree commission meetings. They make their recommendations. They go to the service director, and then ultimately the service
Yeah,
director.
I agree. I mean, since it's a recommendation,
Right, exactly,
I don't know why we would need a formal vote.
right,
And there could also be instances of risk where you have to
Yes.
act quickly.
right,
Right.
right.
You need to have that capacity.
Yeah, exactly.
David, could you review what you have in code and maybe also in guidelines? And
Well, let's wait and talk about that after.
Oh, I meant
Glenn.
specifically just
Yeah.
about this thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
because we might be talking about something we don't have to worry about.
So, I think we agree with what you have described for those situations. Any other
Yes.
questions? So
Yes.
please make our recommendations known. Great,
I can do that.
thank you. Make it so. Okay. The next thing that we have on our list of, for agenda is that we have a presentation tonight by Dr. Glenn Matlack, who's going to be talking about the Athens urban forest in deep time. Glenn is a professor in the plant biology department, so, hi.
Take it away.
Come on now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Glenn Matlack. Most of you know me. I teach in plant biology, and among other things, I look at urban forest. And Athens is a nice, convenient study site. To my thinking, to understand the urban forest, you have to think about it in terms of processes of births, of entry into the urban forest, and deaths, minus from it. It's sort of a demography of the urban forest. Now, births means, of course, planting, or it can just mean recruitment of trees in untended areas. Mortality, deaths can mean all sorts of things. They can die for any number of reasons. Now, I'm not the first person to think in these terms. There have been a number of studies in the last 10 mainly years. Most of them have dealt with large planting programs in big cities. One well-known project was done in Oakland a few years ago. They planted several thousand trees, and for several years they just went out and looked at them. Is it still alive? Okay, and this is the sort of data they get. If this axis here is time in years, and the vertical axis here is the number surviving, the log of the number of surviving, this was what an ecologist would call a survivorship curve, they found really severe mortality. Okay, that means the curve is really steep here. And most of the mortality is due to planting-related issues. Okay, the trunk is scarred, or it's planted too deep, or it's planted too shallow, or something like that. But after the first 3 to 5 years, the curve becomes more gentle. The curve becomes more gentle, and it becomes linear, which is to say they're still dying, they're not dying as fast, and they're dying for random reasons, not related to planting. And this is valuable insight, but consider that the organisms, the trees we're looking at, may live 100, 200 or more years, and I think we need to have some insight in what happens to these trees in the long term, rather than simply the first 6 or 8 years. The second concern I have is that these large planting studies are very homogeneous. Okay? This sapling we just put in is a great deal like that in its situation, its planting circumstances, and that's just not the nature of a real urban forest. So a proper study would deal with variation in environmental conditions. And I suggest that a good way to approach this, rather than marking and watching individual trees, is to use aerial photographs. For example, this is a patch of west central Columbus, and you see the water, you see streets, you see buildings, parking lots, and lots of trees. In fact, in some places you can even make out individual trees in the image there. This has the great advantage of allowing you to survey large numbers of trees, and also we have aerial photographs reaching back several decades. Okay, here in Athens we have aerial photographs back to 1939 showing great detail. And maybe earlier, and if any of you know of aerial photographs earlier than that, please tell me. So there's Athens. There is Athens. And you see the river here. You see Route 33 coming down from Columbus. You see the convo there. You see the racetrack, the fairgrounds. And we are right now, somewhere in here. Yes, right about there. And you see lots of trees, okay, and you can see them in great detail. Now, that's great, but that's still an awful lot of trees, more than I want to handle in any particular study, so I'm going to need to subsample them. And I do that with a point sampling method, which involves placing a grid over the aerial. Okay, this is a model for purposes of demonstration, but I have a grid with a 100-meter grid interval anchored on the courthouse. It covers about 270 points, and I just go through the grid and I look at the ground cover at each grid point, okay, which allows me to describe in a summary fashion what we've got here. And then I can take the grid and I can go back 20 years. I can establish the same grid on aerial photographs from 2000, 1980, 1960, and 1939. So we can see how land use, including trees, has changed. So, what do you do with data like that? Well, one thing you can do is ask how environmental variation has affected births and deaths of trees at these points. And there are a lot of ways of describing the environment, but one easy and obvious one is to divide the city into different zones. For example, there we have the central core okay, of the city on the bluff there above the river. And that's distinctly different from this zone up here, which is a zone of steeper slopes, okay? And then we, of course, have the obvious zone there, the floodplain. Okay, so I'm asking, using these data, how are trees appearing in the city in each of the zones, and how are they disappearing in each of the zones? So here we are. This is what's happened to Athens in 1939. There's the central core. We're beginning to see some development on the floodplain here, but there's still quite a lot of cultivation, quite a lot of agriculture. Up here on the steep slopes, well, there isn't very much forest.
There we go.
It seems like it's, oh, there I am. Okay. There's actually quite a lot of bare ground up there, which is pasture. Now, so in 1939, you could even call us an agricultural city, although we don't think of ourselves in those terms today. Between 1939 and today, 2014 is the most recent imagery I've used. A lot has happened in Athens. The population has at least doubled. In 1939, we had about 12,000 people in the city. Today, we have something like 27,000. We have built out the floodplain, and up here on the slopes above town, there's quite a lot of forest coming in, mainly on through ecological succession on old pastures. So to describe that numerically using the grid system, this is what happened. If that's 1939 up to the latest set of photos in 2014, and the vertical axis is simply proportion of the landscape, you can see that this texture down here, lawn or pasture, I can't really distinguish them in aerial photographs, they're lumped together, has decreased from about 35% of the landscape down to perhaps 10%. Old field, which means abandoned agricultural land in the upper left here, has completely disappeared. At the same time, we have increased the amount of roof. Okay, so there's more construction going on, and we have increased the amount of pavement at the expense of the old field and the pasture, and the amount of trees. The coverage by trees has actually increased somewhat after going through a pinch point here around 1980. So to break this down by each of the zones I recognized, that's what's going on in the urban core. Okay, you see each of these trends, but in the urban center, these vertical bars, those are roofs expanded rapidly in between 1960 and 1980. That seemed to be the dominant result of development through the study period. If you compare that with the floodplain, you see the same pattern, except rather little increase in roofs and enormous increase in pavement between 1960 and 1980. So we have the same pattern of economic development, but it's expressed differently in the urban core than the floodplain. The one is about construction, building out buildings, and in the floodplain it's about pavement. Now something entirely different is going on the slopes. Okay, here you see, yes, a contraction in the amount of pasture, complete disappearance of old agricultural land, rather little change in roofs, rather little change in pavement, but a great increase in trees. Okay, and this is about natural ecological succession on abandoned agricultural land. So we have two distinct processes going on here: economic development and succession on abandoned land.
Glenn, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So is it that when you talk about area, is it tree canopy coverage meaning area, or is it density of trees?
It's coverage.
Okay.
I'm simply sampling whatever's covering the ground, and it can be a very large number of tiny trees, or it can be a smaller number of really big trees.
Is it important to know the difference or not? I mean, a lot of people would say that tree value is different from an old tree versus several young trees, at least in terms of carbon value, but in the way that you see things.
Yes, it is important, and we can address that by looking at births and survivorship, which I'm about to come to.
Thank you.
So that's survivorship, okay? If this is the time and the vertical axis is percent surviving, okay, 100 would be 100%, what we started with, and 0 means they're all dead. So, again, this is what an ecologist would call a survivorship curve. That line represents all the trees which were present in the oldest photograph. Okay, and you see their number declines through time. They are dying. Keep in mind this is a log scale, so the decline is not a linear representation of the number. But they're dying along a straight trajectory, more or less straight, which means they're dying probably for random reasons, independent of one another, and they're dying at a constant rate through the study period.
Could you clarify that? I'm not sure. Why does it show that the tree's canopy was improving, but the decline was in the older trees? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in this particular group of trees, okay, there were all the trees, this line represents all of the trees which were present in the first photo. Okay? So, and I've separated them out from the trees that appear in later photos.
So what he's saying is that the trees that were there in 1939 are dying of random reasons, not because of a specific
Well, having
reason.
been born in 1939, we are all dying.
Yep.
But I mean, there could have been a specific rather than a random
Yeah.
event.
Yeah, and you
I
can
hope
draw
I-
these curves for people as well as you can draw them for trees. So if we separate them out and then look at all the trees that were first appeared in the photo from 1960, that gives you the second curve there. And again, they're dying. They're dying along a straight line, which suggests a constant rate of mortality. And it's more or less parallel with the first curve, suggesting that they're dying for much the same reasons. And we can then compare that with those that first appeared in the 2000 photos. Now, you may notice that one interval is missing there. That's because the image quality in 1980 wasn't so great. But again, they're declining, and the rate of decline is more or less parallel with the others. So it suggests that trees die, and they die at constant rates, irrespective of their age and irrespective of the time period. Okay, we see a much different pattern in births. Their births. Okay, the first bar there are all the trees that were present in the original photo. Come on, do it. There we go. The second bar there are all the trees which were not present in the first photo, but first appeared in the second photo, the 1960 photo. And wow, look how big that is. That's almost as many trees appeared between 1960 and 1980 as were present in the first set of photos. So there were a lot of tree recoupment between 1939 and 1960. By comparison, look at the number of trees first visible in 1980. Okay? Those were all the trees that appeared between 1960 and 1980, and there are quite few. There are very few. And compare that between 1980 and 2000, okay, an enormous number of new trees. and you see between 2000 and 2014. So recruitment into the urban forest is definitely not constant. It's episodic. We have phases in which we have lots of recruitment and phases in which we have very little.
So what are all the things that account for those differences? Or all the ways that
Well, I don't
look
know.
at those differences?
We have to think back to the history of development, the history of population growth, and I haven't touched on that here. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
describing what's happened.
Well, I learned at a workshop I went to that we've been a tree city for 33 years. So when would that have been?
That would take us back to what, 1985?
Yeah, I think 87.
1990s.
87? Yeah. Okay,
So-
well,
Maybe
That's very
that's
striking.
because of the small tree recruitment, people started really being
Yeah,
concerned.
yeah.
But wouldn't you be able to look at where is the tree recruitment, on which of those 3 areas?
yes, you would.
Okay,
And
that's the
gonna be
next slide, Glad I'm good at segues.
Tell us.
Just let him do his thing.
Spoiler.
No, I like that. The student's paying attention. You're a student, but good. You're
No,
seeing where
I'm
this is
happy to be
going.
a student.
Okay, this is what happens in the urban core. We only look at trees which were in that central zone there. We see that, yes, they're still declining. We have mortality. Again, it's parallel, suggesting that the same process is happening, affecting all trees. And we have this great variation in tree recruitment. So that kind of mirrors the overall pattern. Let's compare that then
That
with...
picture that you show is just so unfortunate, though.
Yes, yes it is. I think you picked it.
I thought we picked it on purpose. So there it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah,
The tree's gone now.
Okay, yeah, I've noticed.
so sad, so sad.
That's a
On,
good picture, though.
on slopes, okay, we get a much gentler mortality. The curves are not as steep, suggesting they're dying not as fast. And, my gosh, it does what it wants. Okay, and here, if we look at births on the slopes, we find rather little variation across time periods. Okay, it looks like trees are being recruited into the urban forest at more or less a consistent rate. On the other hand, if we compare that with the floodplain, wow, trees are dying on the floodplain, especially old trees. Okay, for some reason, it is particularly risky to be a large tree on the floodplain. And the pattern of recruitment, though, is strongly episodic, similar to the urban core. So in each of these environmental zones, topographic zones, there's a different story going on. Now, obviously, there are things that happen to the urban forest at finer scales. You can work right down to the scale of the individual tree. I haven't addressed that here. The conclusion, well, several conclusions. Recruitment is episodic. Recruitment goes through phases which appear to reflect the history of the city in some way, perhaps the tree ordinance, many other things. In contrast, mortality has been more or less consistent over the last 80 years. And there's a strong contrast between the different regions of the city. And you can understand them in terms of 2 general processes. First, economic development, and second, natural ecological succession. So there are at least two drivers here. And working together, they result in very different age structures and density of trees in different parts of the city. So mortality and births come together to create the overall structure of the forest, to come to your point. I would recommend to the city that we monitor the urban forest regularly so that we see these trends as they begin to happen rather than work discovering them retrospectively. It seems to me that 10 years would be a good interval for monitoring. I would suggest that we plant trees continuously so we have a variety of ages Okay, rather than cohorts of larger and smaller cohorts of trees of different age. And we keep in mind that all parts of the city are not experiencing the same processes and are not alike. Okay?
So when was your last time point? It was 2014?
2014, and it was determined by when the photos were available.
Right, so I'm wondering, we're now in 2022 after the Emerald Ash Borer. Would it make sense to use this methodology to have a more recent time point?
It's getting time for it anyway if we do 10 years.
Drew?
Yes, I think it would. And it has the great advantage that you can do it quickly, as opposed to surveying tree by tree. Now, tree by tree surveys, understanding what's going on in terms of individual trees is also important. The great advantage of this is that it allows you to have an overview on the large scale.
So the two should be done
I agree.
both times.
So the question then becomes, is this something that your group still has capacity? And is there a cost associated? And is that something that you would want to submit as a proposal to the city?
I can imagine a student doing it, and we could submit a proposal to the city. I would recommend waiting for a little while. If you get shorter than a 10-year interval, you get stochastic processes. It's just too small, too few trees, and you start getting a lot of static.
So you would recommend doing it in 2024, is that what I'm hearing?
I would.
Not that far.
And from the data that you have, are you able to give an estimate of percent tree canopy, which is a number that might not be the most scientific thing, but is something that cities do tend to report?
Well, that would be the third slide.
When you say plant continuously,
It means like every year.
Yeah.
I mean, how many? Do you have an idea of the quantity?
So tree cover
Never more than
increased
you can
20
take
to
care of.
30.
Never more than you can take care of. I mean, you gotta protect them from deer, you gotta keep the lawnmowers off them, and you gotta water them.
But we got to start with somewhere, so let's say,
Right,
what's
right.
the ideal?
I think it shows that the big decrease is something that we are going to be experiencing in our mortality a whole lot more because there's just not that many trees in that cohort. So we don't want that to happen because then it,
Yeah.
so.
So what would be the ideal for us to shoot for
The ideal,
numbers?
I wouldn't know. I would defer to Ann on that.
Right. I
And
don't
it
think we
also
know.
depends on the manpower in the city budget.
Right.
And one of the things.
25, and then we
Well, you know what
So that-
what I've noticed in
We
my
said
career is that
25.
you know, the towns that plant 25 or 50 a year for 20 years make a way bigger impact than the communities that get the $1 million grants or do the million tree.
Do hundreds of trees.
Yeah, because those
Then
are,
they
like
all
you
die,
said, you know,
yes.
there's such a steep mortality.
Also they
But
tend to be
you look at Logan, look at Chillicothe, like I don't have the data, but you know, when you drive the streets, just from decades of planting, there's just an assortment of younger trees coming up in between.
And you're saying like 25, 50 a year?
Chillicothe probably does about 100. And Logan's had years where they did around 100, but I think consistently Logan started out doing 25 or 50. And it was what they could, you know, they only planted where people wanted them and where people committed to taking care of them. And that was key. You know, they didn't start out by saying, we're going to plant 40 trees up and down Main Street and then watch them all die over the next, you know. You guys have actually done really well with some of your big plantings. You know, the trees look really good.
And we're very fortunate that we have the university that takes up a great deal of our landscape, and they
Well, you
have
could see in that
maintained
map,
our
a lot of
trees.
that was Ohio University.
Yeah.
Well, I
Can I ask
think,
two follow-up questions? Real quick ones. This is based on, you said, over 200 points. Was it kind
Around
of,
270, I believe.
okay, and kind of evenly distributed among those three geographic
I
areas?
don't remember exactly how many were in each category, but there's no egregious differences. It was
And then the other thing I was wondering, did the channelization of the hogging play out a lot in your floodplain data?
I'm sure it did. If we go back to those,
I would expect also
Those
when
transition measures.
rentals, houses turned into rentals, one of the first thing people do is cut everything down.
And you can't
And
put a
that
hammock
was-
up. You can't put a hammock up.
Yeah. But that was probably also having to do with a lot of that expanse of rentals during that time.
Well, when did the river get changed?
69,
it was
71.
1967 to 1970.
Yeah,
That's correct.
Because all along that river, there's no trees.
Well, yes, but if you can't see, can you see it? There it is. If you look at that area in 1939, those were agricultural fields. So we've gone for no trees for one reason to no trees for another reason.
Okay.
It was agricultural, it was parkland, there were trees. If you look at the old pictures from that time period, before the moving of the river, there was a whole,
Yeah, I don't have 1960 here, so I can't say exactly. I'm sure we lost some, we gained some, but I don't think it was a major loss of forest due to the channelization.
So we talk about 3 zones, and I think that's important, but also Athens is composed of neighborhoods.
Yes?
And, you know, when we listened to Rachel, and she talked about equity in neighborhoods, I'm wondering, can we look at the data that you have and also look at coverage within the neighborhoods and whether or not there is equity of the tree canopy coverage?
Yes? Okay, I know point by point what happened to coverage at each of them. It's just a matter of parsing them out into different neighborhoods. The problem is that the neighborhood has to be large enough so that you have enough points in there to escape just sort of static.
But I think that having that data might allow us, or at least inform us for our
Right.
tree plan.
Well, there also might have to be a finer scale to look at some of the equity issues. So that would be combining.
Yeah, if we were to break it down by neighborhood, you'd have to have a finer grid. And there's one limit is just the size of an individual canopy.
But I would imagine that you could probably look at it at the greater scale and then decide whether or not you wanted to go to a finer scale. I would imagine that it might be a gross difference or, you know.
Yeah, and it might, yeah.
So I would be interested in that because we certainly have people in the east neighborhood who have been definitely talking about inequities there, how because of rental properties, they feel that the trees have not been replaced at the rate that they would like. And I would just like to be able to see whether or not the data supports that.
That would be an awesome project for a student.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now you're saying that we should wait 2 years, and I'm like, I want my data sooner.
I have the aerial photographs and I can make them available to the tree commission if they want them. I mean, not to
Yeah,
analyze at this level, but simply to look at them. But the
Well, the other-
visual impression is very
The other
strong.
things that we need to do is to figure out
Okay.
what we can handle and getting it in place. You know, getting
Right,
in place
right.
all the supports that are
Well,
going to be needed.
and I think that's why when we finish up with Glenn, we can go and then discuss what we need to do for the rest of the year.
Yeah, what are
Which
the
will
priorities?
include what sort of things we need to do for the Arbor Day and for education and stuff. So I think that
Well,
Glenn.
that's a different process. I mean, I agree, we need to do that, but I think it would be good for us to spend a little bit of time on figuring out what planting we're going to try and do over the next.
yeah. I think the
Until we know
planting
more.
is really important, but I also agree with Chris in the way that I think the education has to come possibly even before the planting because you know,
That's one of
we
the
want to
things.
affect that tree
Okay, that's one
survival.
of the things we want to do, is do
Yeah.
some education. What else do we need to do? What
Oh,
else?
I
Why
agree,
don't
but
we-
I think they're
yeah.
almost tied together.
Right. Let's talk about that after we finish up with Glenn, because that was on the agenda. That
But I
was
agree
the
with
next
you.
one. Yeah. So,
Okay.
any more questions for Glenn?
Well, I just wanted to thank you.
Yeah.
This was very
Thank you.
informative, and I don't ever mind being a student. I think that's one of the highest compliments you can ever give somebody, actually.
We're
So
all
thank you.
students.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you later.
Awesome.
Be home later, honey. Okay, so feed the kitties. So what I now would like to have this discussion that we started a couple times with what Glenn was doing and talking about. What I'd like to do, I kind of thought of the idea of fleshing out a calendar for our year. Because what's happened in the past is Arbor Day comes around in October, our Arbor Day, or that's when the application is due for Tree City. And then it's like, oh, what are we gonna do? So I wanna plan out things so that our Arbor Day is going to be a successful Arbor Day with plantings and other things. In addition to looking, another section that we have to review is all our processes and our paperwork sort of So that's another area that we need to review. And then that's the procedures and the permits and make sure that we know what we're doing, and that will include Lisa and some. That will result maybe in some code changes and
Well,
stuff.
does the education part include?
Let's wait, and then the third one is my notes.
Wait, what
Here.
are they again?
Data.
Number 1, number 2. What?
Okay. Education, I put events, processes, and codes because we need to review those because they haven't been reviewed. That's kind of a secondary process that we need to be on top of for the calendar for the rest of the year. And then we have to have a discussion about what we want to do with data, how we want to collect data, and how we are going to use data, and make some procedures so that when we're doing something like that, that we know what we're doing, and we have the right data, and we're asking the right questions. So my thought in this is that we could develop 3 subcommittees to each take one of these processes on. So there'd be like an events subcommittee, a process code, super geek out nerdy subcommittee, and a data geek out nerdy subcommittee.
I see what you're saying with the 3. I think I look at it slightly differently, but not a lot differently. Events, I definitely agreed. And then procedures, definitely agree. I think that education sort of is linked to all of them, so I don't know that we need an education committee specifically, but I do agree with Nancy that perhaps tree planting is the 3rd
Right.
priority.
Right. Well, I think that what we're going to run into is that when we start talking about tree planting, we're going to want some of this data. And,
We're gonna want
and
what?
we're
Yeah,
going to
so-
want some of this data.
Right.
But the other thing is, we're talking about hiring an intern. We want to make sure we make good use of them, so we want to have some of those questions.
So maybe informed tree planting. So that way it means that, yes, we're collecting data as well as just planting trees.
Right, well, and the thing is that there's a lot of ways of collecting data out there.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh,
that-
yes, including asking the neighbors whether they want a tree.
Right,
That's the question that I want to do.
Who's the intern? I filled
we
out.
don't know yet.
Is
And of
it,
course-
who is hiring the intern?
We don't know yet.
Oh, so
it's a
there's no,
thought.
but what entity wants to hire the, or is this just an idea?
An idea.
Oh, okay.
And the city has 2 internship slots that haven't been filled yet, that we might be able to convince the mayor that this would be a good project.
Especially now we just announced it on TV.
Okay.
Hear that, Steve? I know you're listening.
He's like, oh no.
Okay, I want to say it's
So
probably.
what I wanted,
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask, at some point in all of the education part and the events part, we need to find some way of involving the people that we want to plant for.
Right.
So,
The
And-
stakeholders.
Right.
yeah, the
Right.
stakeholders.
Okay, so one of the things that Catherine and I did was we went and talked with Andrew about the process of doing the Tree City. process and making sure that we calendarize it so that we can make it. So Catherine's been doing some
Yep,
work on that. So she's going to give a little talk. I think maybe what we might want to do after Catherine talks about the Tree City thing is to have a discussion about what sort of events we would maybe want.
I thought you wanted me to talk about trees.
I do. I want you to do that too. So, okay, Catherine?
Oh, yeah, well, I was also going to backtrack and say it's probably a good thing David gave us our codified duties and responsibilities, and it's good to, I think, helpful to link all these things we're going to do with the priorities that we're required to do, which I think they do fall, but I just keep seeing a little list of points. As far as Tree City, the application opens in September, the process, but I think that's way too early for us to submit. We got to wait for our Arbor Day, for sure. And I think we discussed the application standards fall in 4 areas. We meet them, a tree board, which is us, a tree care ordinance, a community forestry program that spends at least $2 per capita annually, and Andrew has got all his numbers at his fingertips, and it adds up pretty quickly. And then the proclamation and celebration of Arbor Day. Let's see, so I wondered, in sending out, I sent out a thing today to everyone, and it didn't get to, there was one person it didn't get to because it was too big, and I wondered if it would be helpful to have if we had a Google Drive site somewhere, or where we could put stuff.
Please don't do that to me.
No.
No, if you guys want to do it, but just email to me.
But how do we get?
I have so many of those.
Well,
Okay.
some of the data sets are so large that they will not go on the email.
Oh, it's okay then. Yeah, just email me to go look at the Google.
Right, that's what it is. You should get
Perfect.
an email
Right.
that says the Google. I don't know how we do that or if we want
Yeah.
to, but for the large data sets that we are sending around, they won't go on some emails. That's
Totally
a
understood.
side point. We are also, maybe this is a decision, we're also eligible for a Tree City Growth Award. And there, I counted up, there's like 87, they have a list of 87 things, and you could have, in order to earn 10 points, I think it would be pretty easy for us, as I look at the list, to do that.
We get a gold star? Yay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think it looks quite possible, so should we add that in to the to-do list? Okay.
Okay.
So in order to meet the timelines, if I heard you correctly, it'll be September, October where you prepare the application, but it will be after our event.
Well, last year, I think it was it was submitted towards the end, like end of November into December.
Oh, okay, so it can even go that late.
So it
Well, the
we'll
deadline
it's
is
not
December
posted yet.
1st.
We'll find out.
December 1st. Yeah.
December 1st. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that we want to put on our calendar.
Yes, but my question is that something that gets done by the committee, or is that a task group? And
Well, I
do we
would-
need to assign people?
Yes.
Okay.
That, all of us are going to be on a subcommittee
And
after we
that's-
get out of here. Okay.
And
So-
there is a portal. So the Arbor Day Foundation has a portal.
Right.
And Athens has an account.
Yep.
And I believe Andrew Chicky, kind of holds the password and
You get
that,
the
or maybe
password.
David does. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
there's a password for entry. I have that.
Yeah,
And then go
'cause
in
it
and you
could
can
be
see our last 2 applications.
Yeah.
It's a very minimal process.
Right.
So
But it requires that we have done a lot, which we do.
I have a question. So we have 3 subcommittees, and one of them is not called Tree City USA. So does it fall within the events because it's linked to Arbor Day, or does it fit
I would
in
do
the
an
tree
event.
planting?
I would do events because
Okay,
it's just
good.
easier to think of.
Well, and I think that you both are gravitating towards the events subcommittee, if I'm not
Well, I've already
speaking out
got,
of turn.
yeah, I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So the subcommittee of events will include the Tree City application process, and whatever other things that we decide with our discussion with our other stakeholders, which could be neighborhood associations and those sort of things. So as a subcommittee there, Catherine and I and whoever wants else to be on that subcommittee, and then we can make a report like next meeting
Perfect.
on stuff. Okay,
Does anybody else want to join that
Yeah.
subcommittee?
you want to be on that subcommittee?
Oh, sure.
Okay, Nancy is. We can, that will be fun. Awesome. Okay. The process and code,
That's me.
okay.
I'm a
help.
process girl.
I can help you out with that too.
Totally happy to have you.
Okay. And then the actual tree numbers. I think what we want to do at some point, we're going to want to look, like, and you send us plans all the time, tree plans all the time. And I think it would help for everybody to look at those and see which ones, sing to us about, either how they do it, how it's presented, the type of data and how they present it, so that we can get the best, kind of the best out there. So when we start doing our tree plan, our urban forest tree plan, then we know kind of how to do the data and some of the other issues and questions that we'll need to address then.
Chris, let me clarify. So usually what I'm sending out are not necessarily plans that include data about their canopy.
No, like the comprehensive plan sort of thing.
Well, I think what I've been sending out lately is more process-oriented stuff,
Okay.
like policies and procedures,
Right.
and how do you, how not you,
Right.
How does
how
one-
how the committees.
But it would be,
Operate.
I think it would be helpful if you know some, like our comprehensive plan's 64 pages. It doesn't have all the data with
Yeah.
it, but it identifies some of the.
I think you guys are years away from a plan. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
Like start small.
Yeah, but I
You
would
know,
like to look
I
at
mean-
plans so I know what to
Oh,
not
there's a
do.
million online and no one ever looks at them. But I mean, I can send you some, but yeah. I mean, I love the events committee because I think that encompasses education, because that's when you outreach to the community. And I love the processes, where you're gonna be, that's gonna keep you busy.
But I would
Those two
say
things.
this, that is one time where I think a Google Docs would help, because I get overwhelmed by your emails sometimes.
Oh, okay.
And no, you should send them. But what should happen is that everything that you send should go into like a folder, tree plan, procedure, and so that way when we actually need it in real time, we can go back and go, that's right, and dump that in this folder.
And we don't have to each-
now it's there, rather than me sorting through the emails looking for
Right.
what you actually have given me.
So you don't have to make your own, we don't have to make our own individual. There it
Exactly,
is,
and so
right?
that's where I think.
Could you set that up, Catherine?
Is there someone at the city someone mentioned there's someone.
I don't know. Who would
Yeah,
do that?
so
I think if you
can
work with Google Drive, you'll have to talk to my boss, Scott Thompson. He might be able to.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I work with Scott on website stuff, so I'm happy to try and figure out where we can have a behind the scenes, not on the website
Right.
type of.
So you're gonna
And
do that?
you guys.
Yes, I will-
Oh,
I will do that.
the city council
Yeah.
has Drive. I mean, we had a Drive that we could,
Yeah.
And any time that you can't find something and you just want something, just take a shot and email me, because my phone is always on me, and I'm happy to. I've got calendars, sample calendars and all that, which I'm going to send you when I get home. But yeah, so I apologize for that. Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Because you're right. It's hard to look at them when they're all lined out, and there's four attachments.
Right. Okay. So I think, though, we need to not get ahead of ourselves about hiring hiring,
An intern?
thank you, a consultant. They're student consultants. Before we know kind of what sort of data we want to get. So I'm looking at you.
Yeah, so I see that. I'm
Yeah.
looking at it. So
Between you and
there's what we've been talking about, or talking email exchange, or keeping track of individual trees, and then getting an estimate of canopy cover.
Well,
And
I think that's I don't know. And, I think that
we need
there's.
individual trees though immediately.
Right.
so
but
that Catherine sent around that Voinovich project, and that person's walking around with GPS tree to tree. That's overkill for what we're doing. So we
I
want to
think
do
so.
more imagery.
I think so.
And you do know that in 1992, the city contracted with ACRT and did a street tree
So
by
where
tree.
is it?
It's here. It's some.
Wait, I think it's on the web.
Yes, I've seen it. I think I can find it.
Did you send those out?
So that was done in
No, I didn't see it all, but I think
1992,
it's,
and that was tree by tree. And then in the early 2000s, Jackie Klopfer
We
was
have
this-
that one.
Yeah. So she did quite a bit of work and compared the two. It's quite fascinating. I mean, you have enough data. You know a lot. Like,
Right.
I mean, just I think you know more than most of the towns, that I serve. So that's a lot right
But I
there
would
to
like,
work
I would like to
from.
know enough to know whether there are pockets of the area that don't have
Well,
any trees.
yes, and we need to be able
Yeah,
to.
that's the equity issue.
Yeah.
We need to be able to figure out how we're going to collect the data and whether, the imagery or doing what Glenn does, and write the questions down. Like the equity question is a really important one. An age question might be really important. I don't know.
Kinds.
I don't know how, like, the
But-
data.
So that's the third
sources.
subcommittee, so,
Well, one
That's
question
what
I would ask folks, Nancy and I had an email exchange earlier, like, do you want to know what's happening in a park or a neighborhood? Like, do you predefine these areas that you're interested in? Or do you make I'm going to do the whole city at this size, and then I can query it for whatever. So if you know that I want to know which neighborhood needs trees, then start looking at neighborhoods right at the get-go. But if you're not
That's my
sure, then you choose something smaller, which is going to be a lot of work. But then
I
you
think
can
it's
combine it.
neighborhood, and I think it's just looking at the gross images that Glenn has that he offered to share, and just getting a really gross idea. And then if we decide we need more detail, then we decide what detail we need and how we're going to get it.
He said we needed both in order to do a good job.
You need what?
To do both,
Well,
the imagery and
so,
I see. I would approach it completely different, and I'm not necessarily right. What I would think is you guys need to establish a budget. So to be a tree city, you got to spend $2 per capita. You should be planting trees every year. So you've got all summer to find tree planting spots.
but
Say
and
you-
the thing
Well,
is
let me-
about the budget, we don't have to plant any trees. We
Well,
do
yes, you'll
enough
meet your
in-
$2, but in the
But we
spirit
do
of
that
tree,
without planting trees.
right? But in the
Yeah.
spirit of Tree City USA, and we're all in this because we want to increase canopy cover. It's only
Mm-hmm.
going to happen if you plant. So my thought was this year, you've got all summer. You I believe have some money. If
We have
you-
$5,000.
Okay, then do the math. That's what 10, 20 trees. Find some homes for them. I could think of 10 places right now that need trees. My gosh, North Congress used to have amazing trees on it. North Congress, and I would not.
Yeah.
Your town is small. I mean, I'm not trying to discount the equity stuff and all that. It's all important, but you have go where there's good soil, where you know people that will take care of them. Start out with do 10 trees this fall and see, and let's not wait. And you did a great job with West State Street, but
Yeah.
remember how like that was so frantic and it was, but this you've got time.
Well,
There's so
We've already decided that, or the mayor's decided where he wants the trees this year. He wants more at West State Street. But there's another program where Andrew Chicky, working with Catherine Ann, have another priority where they want to plant in neighborhoods. And so they brought to us a letter where it was going to solicit, would you be willing to watch a tree if we planted it? And then the recommendation from Shade Tree was, don't do it that way. Have people come to you and say that they want the trees. So I hear what you're saying, and we've already accounted for 40 trees that are going to be planted this year,
okay,
just because it was a leftover from last year. But you're absolutely right that in the future, but here's my caution. When we had Catherine Ann here and we were talking about tree planting priorities, she got irritated with us because she said that was her purview and that we could make recommendations, but she very much wanted to be the decision maker.
on the park trees or street trees too.
Both. And so I think that we need to bring her into the conversation. So I agree that, using these aerial maps, we can say, listen,
Yeah.
this is how we're prioritizing, but we also have to listen
Do what she
to
was
them.
saying.
And there are other, so whoever is on this third committee has to understand that there's gonna be some interfacing with Ann, because she's gonna be able to tell you soil structure and where the trees are gonna do well. You have to interface with Catherine Ann. You have to interface with building, because that's where we ran into problems with West State Street is that we didn't get their building plans properly. So whoever's gonna take this on, be aware it's gonna be a lot of networking with the city. And I will throw my hat in there and say, I would love to be on that committee
So
too.
maybe it's not called data, maybe it is the planting committee with all of that we all
And that
understand
the data goes in there, and the
yes,
politics
planning.
goes in there,
Yeah.
and the public goes
we-
in
can
there,
we-
and
Well, I mean,
stakeholders.
at one
and-
point, the public's going to be in all of this, because the public's, you know, and we also that we also have the Athens Arbor Day Committee, who we now have a MOU with them, and
They're
they.
gonna plant.
And we
And
get
they're
2
making-
points for that on our application.
Yeah. And so,
That's
you know, we
cool.
have a MOU, and they're gung ho to do plantings.
Well, I had another idea.
Yeah,
In the ordinance about the celebratory trees, it says that there's a place that they're gonna put the trees. I don't know where it is.
We don't know either. That's
knows?
right, and that's another one of those issues.
Well, one of the things that at the Tree City thing, the presentation was about 2 cities that have places where they're, focus on the trees and the environment and the plushness of the place, beauty of. And I was thinking that we could maybe identify some place that we could see that in the future by planting a few here and a few there, and maybe some of the celebratory trees, build a beautiful spot in our community that people could really treasure and look up to, and we could sell.
So that's one of the other, hopefully, things, identifying areas possible like that when so. Do you want to be the chairperson of that?
well,
Of that
I was
subcommittee?
gonna be the chairperson of the process and code, I thought, so I would
So
like
you could do
to.
which one?
I would like Jim to be number 3, and I
Okay.
will work with Jim, because Jim knows trees
And you might be able to get Glenn on
and
there
stuff.
too.
And
So,
Glenn.
Yes, so he's a
Jim,
second.
Another
are you
question.
willing? Are you willing to do subcommittee 3?
There's some parts of it that make perfect sense for me to do, and other parts, like interfacing with.
That's fine. I'm
You're a
fine
better
with that.
interface.
If you chair it, then you can delegate.
Oh,
Well, can we call it the
Because I
planting
don't know what
committee?
to do.
I just feel better calling it that.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's more.
that's fine.
You're making the minutes.
Right, I get this.
Yeah.
You could just call
What
it
did we
whatever
say?
you want.
Planting.
All right, so Catherine, Chris, and Nancy are on the events subcommittee. Roxanne, you are heading up the process and procedures.
And I'll be on
committee.
that.
And by the way, David, you're on that
that
committee automatically.
Okay, you're on the process and procedures. That's good.
And what I
You-
would really like to do is to set up time for me to come to the office and to sit down
That'd be
and
great.
sort of
Yep.
outline. And by the next meeting, we can talk about some of the issues
Yep.
that he's having interfacing with the
Yes.
public.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
And I want to
So-
be on the committee with Jim and
Okay.
Roxanne.
Cool.
Can I ask a
Okay, on
question
the
about that?
planting.
And it-
What about, should we, should Catherine Ann, since she's expressed the desire to
I
oversee.
would welcome her even to our meetings. I think that.
I thought she was coming.
It hasn't been finalized,
Rec.
but
Parks and Rec,
I
I'm
think
assuming.
that if maybe Jim could reach out to Catherine Ann and just say, this is, we're gonna start talking about tree planting, how would you like to be involved? Or do you want me to reach out to Catherine Ann as your deputy of
Delegation.
delegation? Yeah, your
If you're
delegate?
offering, I'll take you up on it, but if you want me to do it, I'll do it.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. I have to
Okay.
talk to her next week about planting for the pool, so
Oh, there you
what's
go.
at it?
Yeah, I think that's important.
Are you going to put
then
some of the Menard trees there?
No, these are the actual planters with
Oh, the
annuals and
planters.
stuff like that.
Oh, okay. The tree, the plants.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about tree cover? Like Glenn's points are just random, right? Do we have control, or can we ask people, do you want a tree in your neighborhood? Or are we only talking about shade trees? Because what I've been struck by is how many sidewalks are right up against the curb. And that, it's like, well.
Well, there's,
they-
yes, no median.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so what
there's
do you
no
do?
murder strip.
So-
There's no sidewalks in my neighborhood.
Yeah, so are we almost like identifying where we can plant trees based on this right away?
There's a right of way, right.
Or
On some
can we
streets,
branch out
You
and say,
sometimes can plant behind the sidewalk, usually the right of way, again, it's gonna vary and David would be the person on this, but usually it'll go a foot or two behind the sidewalk. But cities, there is a precedent for planting behind sidewalks, even on private property with public trees. A lot of cities are doing that because trees do so much better and there's
Correct.
less
Yep.
infrastructure
Yep.
issues.
Yeah.
But I think you'll flesh all that out, the more you get into this. Again, plant your easiest places first.
Right.
And you're gonna start so small, well, no, I guess you're starting big, 40 trees. But you have homes for all those 40 trees already.
For 33 of them right now, yeah. But it's just, that's assuming that the city sticks to their plans and wants to fill out the rest of West State. But they haven't finished the construction, so I don't know if they're gonna be ready. It might be that we have to come up with alternate planting sites.
Oh.
So, yeah, that's something we'll have to look into. But right now, the mayor had stated when he gave us the $5,000 that he did want most of that designated to West State
So
Street.
$5,000 will not buy 40 trees. So
No, we don't buy, that's coming out of the tree bank.
The Menards,
Yeah,
gotcha.
and then
Okay.
it's the $150 per tree for the planting and the maintenance.
Okay.
Okay.
So 33 approximately.
So, do you feel comfortable being the chair of that?
I think so.
Okay, awesome.
You're giving
I love doodles. That's the way I do doodles for meetings and stuff. I'm also like way into email and being able to make a lot of decisions in emails and stuff. And what are you gonna be on, Ben? Are you gonna be on the process one or the events one?
Oh, I'll be honest, I wasn't planning on putting myself on any of them. But,
We'll just fill you in. Unless we need a body and then
yeah,
we'll just
if,
drink.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
If you need someone there,
Okay, yeah.
sure, yeah.
Okay, so let's try to have some preliminary information from all our homework by in the June meeting, June 9th. Is it June 9th? Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, anything else? Do we have public here? Wants to speak?
I have some stuff I wanted to show
Oh,
you.
yes. Nancy went to the tree
We have,
city.
we have a proclamation or whatever it was called.
From the governor.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that wasn't it. It's gone. There it is. There it is. Oh, it's part of the folder.
Nice.
Oh, look
Yay.
at that!
Oh,
Where does that go?
I think it goes to the mayor, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
This
Put it on the wall.
is a plaque, and
Oh,
I haven't
nice.
opened it because I wasn't sure.
Come on.
I've always
I
got
was
a knife on
hoping,
me.
You're gonna be disappointed with what's in that. I'm just.
It's not $1 million?
No, isn't it?
fingernail.
So the city does have a wall of
Okay.
plaques.
Yeah.
Of different years of Tree City, and so that's little plaque that gets glued on to the larger one.
Don't they, did they have it at Stimson Roundabout? Do they have the little where it says Tree City? I can't remember.
There are street signs, and I can give them out to you. I think I do have one or two for Athens that maybe you guys were due for them
Where
in
it says Tree
2020.
City USA, or what does it say?
Yeah, it's a big street sign, it's attractive, it says Tree City USA.
At our education.
Yeah, so that would be a question for probably, who runs the street, maybe Andrew?
Kurt Mail would be the person if you, and I think didn't we get those signs and got them?
Oh, maybe I
Catherine
gave.
did we get those moved down to the?
Oh, that's right, you did get some, see, I have no memory, yeah,
Put it at
sorry.
Stimson Avenue Roundabout, because that's the city's entrance to the city as compared to the Richland Avenue, which is
Yeah.
sort of like the university's entrance.
Yeah, I agree.
That's up to you guys, yeah, I think Catherine did pick them up, I apologize, I forgot.
Yes, I brought them up to the
And-
city hall.
Please let the roundabout continue to look.
We got them
good.
to the
Let us plant it.
Engineering Public Works and they'll be installing them. So where did you say you would like those?
The what?
The Tree City USA signs, the right-of-way
Stimson?
sign on Stimson Avenue, okay.
At the roundabout?
There's two of them. Cool.
Yeah,
There's two
there's-
signs.
Oh, and by the way, where are our plaques?
I have my intern, he was working this week to buy them, so we should be getting them shortly.
Cool.
Goody.
Okay, so that's
I'll
really
have my do
important.
not
There's a
mow
little
sign.
silver,
Right on
there's a
that.
little silver plaque that gets glued onto that. So no, there's a little, it's a little gold, gold
Right
or
in here.
silver.
No, those are.
It's
these
a
are
little
presents.
square and it'll have your year on
When
it.
we get.
The year on
Anything
it?
still in the box?
Absolutely.
Look at the
Oh my
hat.
God.
Got the hat, Tree City USA.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah, so make sure the mayor's office gets that. So Nancy, you should deliver that in hand, like in person.
Say what?
You should deliver that in person to the mayor's secretary so she knows what to
Yeah, I
do with
meant to
it.
call,
Nice.
To buy that wood
Oh,
thing
by
is
the way,
$50.
we're still
So
on
don't lose
TV. Can we wrap up the meeting? Just so we can
Sorry.
say goodbye to
And then they
everybody?
always want me to
Okay,
get them.
is there anything else for the good of the
Don't
order?
lose this.
Hearing none, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you.